All right, we'll get started here. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kristen Biermeyer. I'm the marketing manager at Wagner CPAs, and I am so glad to have you join us for the webinar today on where to start when you want to join the Wisconsin Private School Choice Program. You can feel free to submit questions that you have during the webinar today using the Q&A feature, please, at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be sure to leave some time at the end of Lisa's presentation to answer any questions that come in. The presentation is being recorded today, and I will email that to you along with the slide deck after today's presentation. Our presenter today is Lisa Lang. She is a supervisor in Wagner CPA's Assurance Department. Lisa performs audits for nonprofit organizations and small for-profit entities and is experienced in the Wisconsin Private School Choice and Special Needs Scholarship programs. With that, I will turn things over to you, Lisa.
Perfect. My unmute key went away. Perfect. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I'm so excited that you're joining me to take a deep dive on where you start. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of these programs, but are just maybe hesitant to kind of put your foot into the water and start. And this is exactly what this training is about, to just get you an understanding of what you should do to prep before you even go into the program officially. So I do have experience, as previously mentioned, in this type of specific, very specific audit niche area. I've been working with choice in special needs schools since 2020, actually, which I'm sure all of you remember the wonderful pandemic. So a good year for me is when I started that as honestly my busy fall work. So ever since then, I've been working on becoming very specialized in this area. So the learning objectives today, we have 3 of them. So these are going to be the questions you should be asking yourself before entering the program, and then understanding what the audits are that are required as a participant in the program, and then determining what next steps there are. So some terminology and abbreviations. I wanted to start off with this slide because I personally I'm very bad sometimes in conversation. I will be using abbreviations because I like to be quick and don't want to completely say private school choice program. So with that being said, there's just a couple things that we're going to be abbreviating on my slides going forward in the conversations I'll be having through the slide deck. So private choice school program, it will be represented by choice or PSCP. Special needs school program, scholarship program will be SNSP. Department of Public Instruction will be DPI, and then skills, knowledge, and experience will be SKE going forward. And of course, at any time you forget, just give a shout out and I can make sure I slide back to this slide to remind you. So as I was creating this training, I was thinking, what questions do I want these schools to ask before they get involved, or churches, depending on what type of organization you're a part of. And I came up with 5 really key questions that I think will really get you into the mindset of being prepared. And a lot of the times through my experience, sometimes we see schools, churches come into this program, and there's just a lot of effort after the fact. And that is the whole point of today, is getting you prepared before the fact so you can feel comfortable when you are in the audit selection process to feel good that the audits are going to run a bit smoother. So the first one is going to be, do you have sufficient staffing? Next, do you have proper policies in place over your significant transaction classes? Do you have a person with appropriate SKE performing the accounting? Is choice the right program for you? And then is there any specific technology? So I'm going to be taking a deep dive into each of these questions to give you a better understanding. So we're first going to talk about sufficient staffing. Applications for the choice program take a lot of time. They really are a commitment because we want to make sure that as you're processing the applications, they're done well and accurate. So a lot of the things that you have to consider is you would need to have a resource for answering questions from parents, compiling all the required elements, and reviewing the applications for accuracy and completeness. Next, it just takes a lot of preparation. So as in the third bullet point, it says there's 4 different audits. That is a lot. Typically nonprofit organizations with no religious affiliation have 1 audit a year. So having 4 is a significant undertaking. And I don't want this to scare you, by no means. I think it's a great program to get involved with, but it's definitely the reality that there definitely needs to be a good team in place. And this doesn't mean that you need 3, 4, 5 people. It can be 1 person if it's a smaller school. It could potentially be 2 or 3. So if you're in the situation where it's like, okay, I only have 1 person who could potentially put time into this, it can work as well. So it's just making sure that your level of applicants matches your staffing. Okay, if you have up to 100 and some applications, that's a lot to get through. So you might need some more support. And then 4 audits. You know, if you're a religious organization that has never had an audit, or maybe you have someone come in to maybe do a review for you, it's a lot of undertaking. So we're going to talk about the 4 different types in the next couple slides, so you get a bit of a better idea than just me scaring you with a big number 4. So audits, what are they? We're going to start with the first one. I did order these and how they would be completed in the course of a fiscal year or your school year. Okay, so we first start off doing the September enrollment audit. This will occur in November, and it's basically testing that information from the 3rd Friday in September. So you take account on that day and days before and days after, and then we come in and we test the count is the main purpose. And then we review all choice applications and supporting documentations. So that is a huge undertaking on both parties. That means you have to have everything to support the application readily available. And a lot of the clients I work with, they just have a file for each student, but it's making sure everything gets in those files, right? And I get crates that come into me and we just have to go through them. There is a threshold. However, I don't work with anyone that exceeds the threshold, so I always have to test all of the choice students. The threshold is 125 families. So if you have 2 siblings in the choice program, that is only 1 application. So that only counts as 1 of the 125 limit, which is why, although some of my clients might have like 180 students in the choice program, they only have 120 or so applications that we have to test. So it is definitely a lot. Usually this will last 2 to 3 days. There are other things that we do test through this process, but these are the 2 main areas that we test: the count and then the applications. And then this is due December 15th. So we do the work in November, we write the report, you review the report, and we have to submit it by December 15th. If you ever had a financial audit, you will know that a month and a half less, even depending on when you start in November, is not a lot of time. So it's definitely a team effort to ensure that we get to the deadline. And that goes into just making sure you have the proper staff to make sure with the applications, everything is getting documented and covered. So there's not a lot of back and forth. Next is the fiscal and internal control practices audit. So this will actually occur at the same time the September enrollment audit happens. Usually for my jobs, I take another staff with me. One of us will do the enrollment part and one of us will do the fiscal practice part. So you won't even notice that technically you're having two audits at the same time, but it actually is. And this one is also due at the same timeline, December 15th. And I say 2 to 3 days. Again, that depends on the number of applications. So if you have closer to where we're testing upwards of 100, 125, it's going to take us a full day just to look at applications. And potentially some of my clients that are on the 3-day end usually have a lot of applications, but also have a lot of errors that we have to work through, and then just a lot of transactions that we look at in the fiscal internal control practice. So usually on average, it is just 2 days to do both of these audits at the same time. And then, as I mentioned, December 15th deadline. So again, it's pushing our thresholds of trying to turn this around. And then the primary purpose is to test policies and procedures of up to 13 different areas. I say up to because some areas are actually not applicable for everybody. So a common one is transportation. If you pay for transportation, then it would be required. If you don't have any sort of transportation and all of the children are being taken to the school and by their parents, not applicable. Or you might have a situation where you have vans for field trips, then a different one of the 13 is applicable. So not all of them have to be applicable, but there is definitely up to 13. And there are some clients that do have all 13 that we have to look at. So that's another reason why it could go into that 3-day mark, is just because we have to look at a lot of stuff. And again, not to discourage you from providing busing or having vans. We definitely don't want to discourage that at all. But it's just a forewarning of the type of things we look at. We also look at the budget. We look at background checks, employee compensation agreements. So this area right here is very broad, but it's making sure that the individuals in your school are properly certified, compensated for their job, and then also looking at making sure you're following your policies and procedures. Third is the January enrollment audit, the easiest. This one's so nice. It's like a vacation. I feel like some years, basically the audit will occur in January. Now this will vary. Because of just my cyclical busy seasons that I have, I start them in January. Just to give me a head start on the process. And then DPI doesn't allow us to have access to the reports that we need until about early mid-March. So there is this gap where you won't hear from us, which is nice. And then we'll do the rest of the remaining work, about 20% of it, in March and April once those reports come out. And then we'll finalize by the due date of April 30th. So this one, I say it's a vacation because we have so much time. This is the only one that has so much time to get through it. It's way less work than any of the other ones, which is a nice break to start your year, the new calendar year off. So as I mentioned, again, the work is spread out. Really, a lot of it is just you preparing for the enrollment count and providing all the information after that. And for the September enrollment account, it's the 3rd Friday. This one is the 2nd Friday in January. So once you have that information, it gets all sent to us in January. And then to keep in mind, I didn't mention this in the previous slide, but both of the enrollment audits, you'll see my bullet includes choice and non-choice students. What I mean by that is we are required to test the choice students, 100% of them, or up to the 125 family applications. And we have to select 60 students that are non-choice students and verify their enrollment counts. So sometimes it's a misconception that, oh, we're just looking at choice. But no, that's not the case. We do have to also look at non-choice students to ensure that the enrollment overall that you're reporting to DPI is correct. Lastly, we're on the fourth one, the financial audit. So maybe some of you have had this audit before. Churches and those religiously affiliated with a church don't need to have an audit for Wisconsin. So if you're not familiar, a financial audit is basically testing financial balances as of year end. I say June 30th because that's the required year end for choice and SNSP schools. So June 30th, we look at your cash. What do you have? Your receivables, people who you expect to receive payment from, receivables, people who you expect to pay, payables. So we're looking at each line item. If you were to pull up your balance sheet or statement of financial position, we're looking at all those balances in a material way, meaning we're not testing every single amount. We are not testing pennies, dollars, potentially even thousands of dollars. Okay. It's more of looking at an overall reasonableness of your account balances. And then we also do review revenue and expenses that would be showing up on your profit and loss income statement or statement of activities, whichever term you use. So it is a big undertaking, especially in the first year, which is why we might be up there to usually a week the first year that we do a financial audit because of how much time it takes, understanding your organization, all the procedures we have to do, potential issues that come up if you've never had an audit. So it does take a significant amount of time. However, that does reduce down to approximately 3 days. I do have one client that goes in 2 days. However, they don't have a church. So we are just auditing the school. And you might be like, well, the school is the only one in the program. Like, why do you have to pull in the church if you share the same EIN number? We have to audit everything. So if you go in and have the same EIN with an associating church, all the numbers have to be included in the financial audit. So the church's cash we have to look at, the school's cash we have to look at. Okay, so it's not sometimes as easy as this is just associated with a school. It needs to be a team effort to ensure that the church side of operations and the school operations are good to go. And a lot of the times there are 2 different people associated with that task. So making sure it's a very much team effort so that you can be prepared for this work. A lot of the times it's going to occur in August or September. I would rarely ever push something to like the first week in October because, as you can see, October 15th is a deadline. My usual cutoff is mid-September because we need at least a month. I have turned around an audit in 2 weeks, but no one likes to push themselves to that extreme. So again, this is like the wonderful deadline stress that we have is August, September, and then we have until, depending on where you're at least a month, maybe a little less to get this turned around. So again, it does create that stress like the September enrollment and fiscal practice audits do. However, even so, it's a little less, a lot of work during the week of field work, but it's definitely, I feel, gives us a little wiggle room compared to the first 2. And then part of the audit, we're not only just looking at those financial balances that I mentioned, we're preparing a reserve schedule. So you are required to complete a schedule for choice and an SNSP if you are in both programs, to indicate and show how much money you have spent on your choice students. So we prepare that on our end through information we have obtained through testing the financial balances. So this is why it's important to make sure that you have a good understanding of what your church expenses are, your school expenses are, and even daycare if you're offering that. So making sure that it's not as painful. Some organizations, we do a lot of allocation, and it can be complex or it can be super simple. But thankfully, we do a lot of the work on our end for you to review when you get a draft of the financial statements. And then a review of internal controls. So for a financial audit, we are required to walk through internal controls, and we have to verify that things are properly being reviewed and there's proper segregation of duties. So if there are issues, we do write up what it's called a management letter. We are required, if there's a significant deficiency or material weakness, basically those terms are if there are significant or material issues with internal controls, we have to write up a letter for DPI and the elder board or school board to also get a copy of. And you might be like, I don't even know what a significant issue would be. Great example is no one reviews the payroll registers, no one reviews the credit card statements, no one reviews invoices. So basically, no one is reviewing or approving anything in what we call the cash disbursements process. That is a material weakness because it's so large of an issue. So that is something that we would write a letter for. And this doesn't mean a lot of people, when they hear management letter or hear deficiencies, material weaknesses, they get concerned. And thankfully, what's great about a lot of funding sources, not just DPI, but others, they recognize that if you're entering this program, you might not know everything, and that's okay. They understand that a management letter in the first year of being in the program is likely, actually. Part of the 13 steps in that fiscal practice audit is testing your responses to the management letter. But guess what? It's not required in your first year because DPI is very much aware of, yes, there's going to be issues. They need time to put in recommendations. It's not surprising whatsoever. So I don't want you to get worried that, oh, if I get a management letter in the first year, they're going to kick me out of the choice program. Not at all. We have some clients that might have management letters for several years in a row until they're finally able to put in all of the recommendations that we have implemented. Okay, so it's not a one and done type of situation. So the next question, we talked about proper staffing, then we had talked about the 4 audits. We're on to the second question of proper policies and procedures. So this is huge. We want to make sure that you have proper policies and procedures in place to ensure that it is not a hustle to get some of these things done during the audits. And it can be very stressful because a lot of these policies and procedures, then they have to be drafted. They have to go through the board. They have to get reviewed. They have to get sent to us before the deadline. So we just want to make sure that you have the things in place to ensure that the stress is as low, not unfortunately eliminated, but as low as it can be. So supporting documentation is required to maintain for all transactions. I mean all. For the financial audit, you're probably thinking, okay, well, you say all here, but then you said you might not look at thousands of dollars in the financial audit. You are correct. Kind of confusing, but basically with the fiscal practice side of it, there is no threshold. So I could easily pick something that was $200 in the sample for the fiscal practice audit, $5. It is just a random sample. So we could literally pick anything. With that being said, the big issue, if not maintaining, there are requirements where we have to expand the sample. So that happens a lot with deposits. If we pull a support, we want support for a $200 transaction and you don't have it, we have to select an additional whole other sample for just that one. Let's say in the original sample, you had 2 or 3 issues, it is 30 more per issue. 30, 10, however many is the threshold, because it can change depending on how many transactions you have. But it is not a fun time when we can't find the support. You can't find the support that we're asking for. So that's why I say all. It's very important. Obviously, there's situations I'm sure you've experienced. You might have a credit card, someone missed a receipt. Maybe it's parking. Sometimes individuals don't get receipts for parking and it happened to be misplaced. Stuff does happen. We obviously understand that, but making sure that it's as much as you can get it. And I have recommended clients to do like a missing receipt form. So at least there is proof that like, hey, even though there's a receipt I'm missing, this expense still appears reasonable. And then a system in place for organizing the supporting documentation. So you have to maintain it. And then you also then later, a year later, have to find it. A lot of the times when we request things and they don't have it is because it was never properly filed in the place where it should go. So a lot of the times we really want the organizations to have that system in place. Is it a filing cabinet sorted by months? Is it sorted by weeks? Is it sorted by vendor or customer, student? Making sure that that is solid and making sure it's maintained. I know as we get into the wonderful future of IT being even more involved, you can upload things to the cloud. I have one client that has all of their applications stored online. In each individual folder, a student, each folder is a student name and everything is in that folder and we get access to the folder. So it's as easy as that. Just making sure you find something that works for you and your team before you enter this program. There have been a couple of clients that we've recommended. There needs to be something better in place because of the struggle of trying to find documentation. Next, we want to have a proper segregation of duties. So I mentioned this in the financial audit when we walk through internal controls. So this is the proper prevention and detection of fraud and errors. So you might think, well, I trust Sally has been working for us, and I apologize if anyone's named Sally, that is just a name I pulled out. But if Sally has been working us for 15 years as a receptionist, I trust her. Unfortunately, for audit purposes, trust is not an internal control. You need to ensure that if Sally, the receptionist, what if she retires, right? Who's going to take her place? Someone who might only have been working as a receptionist maybe 1 year before that, or maybe not at all, and is just, this is their new job. How do we ensure that that person is not committing fraud or potentially creating errors? Because sometimes it's not even about the fraud, it's the aspect of we are all human and we are not, although some of us, like myself, wish I could be perfect, we are not perfect by no means. So we want to make sure that there are procedures in place to oversee processes, to ensure if there is fraud, it would be detected, or if there's errors. If you were to even look up a lot of nonprofits, you could look up cases where an executive director was able to commit fraud through the credit card process because no one was reviewing it. Okay, it's as simple as that. And I know as faith-based organizations, you hire individuals with that mindset. And so usually there isn't a concern. However, unfortunately, that we cannot use as support to ensure that you have proper segregation of duties. Next, reconciliations are being performed. So we want to make sure that you are reconciling cash. The bank statement should be reconciled to your accounting software balance. That should be happening every month. You should be tracking and making sure you're reconciling accounts payable and accounts receivable to ensure that those balances are correct at the end of the fiscal year. And next, proper insurance coverages. So DPI has several requirements, and I did not provide the thresholds. They do have that located on their website, which I'm going to bring up towards the end of the presentation. But making sure you have the thresholds that they require if you haven't already. So attendance policies and procedures. So we want to make sure you have the policies in place of determining when a student is present and when a student is absent. There should be procedures on making sure how attendance is taken on the count date, who is reviewing the attendance, how do we handle absences, making sure we're getting the correct support for absences. So you really want those policies and procedures in place, if not already. I know a lot of schools already have that, but if you're an organization that hasn't even started the school, definitely need to put that on your radar. Next is a process for accepting and reviewing applications. Who is going to be the person in charge of compiling the information and determining if, yes, we got all the required items for this application, they are eligible to be in the choice program, we are good to go. Thankfully, DPI has great accesses like checklists, so you can check off to make sure that you do have the proper documentation before the audit even starts. Next is the process for following up on inadequate documentation. So a lot of the times parents will give a utility bill for their resident documentation support, and the utility bill is maybe the wrong period that it needs to be in, or maybe it doesn't say the parent's full name, or it's the wrong address. There's a lot of potential issues. So you want to make sure you do have a good policy in place. Is it reaching out via email, attempt one, phone call, etc.? So you really want to make sure you have these in place, because once audit comes, it is very difficult for the auditors then to come in, realize you have the wrong supporting documentation, and then we have to backtrack, reach out to the parent, and then they have to pull a document and find a document months before then. So you really want to make sure you have the processes in place so that applications are complete and accurate. So again, going on with the proper policies and procedures, I feel like the slides just keep coming with this one. Next, you have policies that are required for the fiscal and internal practices audit. You have to have these, otherwise it'll be non-compliance. So you have the employee expense reimbursement policy, electronic fund transfer policy, eligible education expense, and immoral conduct. Usually you might already have these policies in place with your financial policies. One you might not is the eligible education expense. You have to determine what is an actual eligible expense. Are we including before and after school care? Okay, and we're excluding regular daycare. How are we allocating the rent for the buildings that might be shared with multiple types, with the church, the school, and the daycare? So that is how you would go about of saying, hey, what is actually gonna go on our reserve schedule that we do in the financial audit as an allowable education expense. Next is a capitalization policy for property and equipment. And some of you might be like, I don't know what capitalization is, and I think I know what property and equipment is. So it is required for the financial statements to contain capitalized property and equipment. Basically, these are things like buildings, the land, equipment, vans, copier machines, big ticket items that shouldn't be expensed when incurred, but they should be put on the balance sheet statement of financial position as an asset to your organization. So usually I see for bigger schools, $5,000. Sometimes I see less. Federal requirements, you can't go over $5,000. So somewhere in between, I would say not below 1,000, because then we're capitalizing things like laptops, which don't have an extended life. And that's what these assets are. They have that useful life to where they're going to get, the term is depreciated over the useful life. Now, if you're thinking, we have never done this, we have not tracked the cost of the building, we have not tracked the cost of this land that we purchased back in 1963, that's okay. There are two options. So during the financial audit, which is why I said it might last a week, is because we will come in and for any asset that you want to claim as an actual property and equipment, because you get the benefit of this is you get to include the cost of those assets with your reserve schedule as an eligible education expense for the Choice and SNSP program. So let's say you want to put that building that you got in 1963. You can. However, we need the support for that. We need the purchase agreement way back when, and trust me, it has been done. I had a school that wanted to do this. So we got the supporting documentation for significant additions that they wanted to add. So that's option one, which takes obviously a lot of effort on both parties of creating a list to capitalize and put on the balance sheet. Option two, saying, meh, no thanks. We'll just do the year we start the Choice program and forward. That is a viable option. However, there will just be a permanent paragraph in our letter saying you haven't capitalized items until X date, which DPI is okay with. So those are two different options, just something to think about, as well as having those policies. And then for all school-related employees, you have to have background checks before they're paid, education credentials to ensure that they are properly licensed, and then employee compensation agreements prior to being paid. I say prior to being paid for background and employee compensations, because even if it's a day late signed or generated through DOJ for background checks, that is non-compliance. So you want to make sure we're getting that information through that onboarding process when you hire individuals. And then employee compensations, you should be getting them for teachers when they have their contracted rate determined before the start of the school year. You should be getting them for the hourly employees that support the school, the janitors, the kitchen staff. And then also any bonuses that are getting approved and paid out also need an agreement and to be documented and signed by the school and the employee. That, I would say, background checks and employee compensation agreements are some of the big non-compliance areas, actually, because something slips through the crack. So you really want to make sure you have great onboarding policies in place to ensure that no one goes missed. Next question we have is the appropriate SKE, skills, knowledge, experience. So you do not need to be an expert or have a formal accounting background, okay? Definitely don't. You do not need I went to school at UW-Whitewater. You don't need to have any sort of educational degree at all. However, you still need to have a basic understanding of the proper entering of transactions into the accounting software. Can you enter a bill? Can you enter a customer? So you're making sure tuition is being paid. When journal entries are needed and how to make them. I'm talking about actual manual journal entries that your accounting software doesn't do. And typically these are done in conjunction with accruals, receivables, and payables. So you want to have an idea. Does this mean you have to be 100% perfect? Absolutely not. A lot of the times for my clients, we sometimes pick up missed receivable and payables during the audit process. Definitely happens. Accounting is extremely difficult. So that's okay as long as you understand, oh yeah, that's why it should be going forward. I'll make sure this isn't missed. It's all about learning and making sure you do better after each audit. And then restricted contributions, what they are, how to identify them, and how to track them. So restricted contributions, meaning things like someone gave us a donation for a new stove in the kitchen, making sure it's tracked, and then making sure that, hey, when did we actually pay for the new stove? Okay, did it happen in the fiscal year? Did it happen in a future budget period? Okay, so making sure you can identify it from your donors and when those expenses are actually incurring. A lot of the time, people are doing this through cash accounts, having separate cash accounts for big areas that they get restricted money from, like missions, or they are using a class feature in their accounting software, or they're using a manual spreadsheet. You can do about anything, but it's just making sure it's actually there and that we can look at it. Now, what if there is no appropriate SKU? What if you're on the previous slide, you're like, wow, I don't know what she means by accruals. I'm not sure about any of it. That's okay. Having the current individual attend accounting related trainings is highly recommended. We offer a CNAP course, Certified Nonprofit Accountant, and we offer other trainings and webinars through the year. This training and making sure you are just doing your due diligence to try to have some proficient accounting knowledge. You could obtain an outsourced accountant. I was going to say, probably out of my 6 clients I have for the choice program, 2 of them have outsourced accountants. So it is common, or they have someone who's kind of that chief financial officer role that does it, or a couple of my schools, it is the secretary or administrative person in there. So there's definitely a wide variety of people who can be doing this process. It's just determining if that is good or if there needs to be additional support brought in. Obtaining an outsourced accountant, you don't need them to do everything. Maybe they're just there to help you close out to ensure all the accruals are in place before the audit. Okay, it does not mean that they have to do every bookkeeping entry that someone is already doing. And then you can always hire someone with more SKE. I say that, and it's kind of laughable, I feel like, in this economy right now of what we're all experiencing, I'm sure, is a labor shortage. So sometimes hiring someone, not an option, especially someone in the accounting profession. I mean, as we're in the public accounting profession, we definitely understand that individuals in accounting, hard to come by. So that is why it's very much on the bottom of the list. It's more of just utilizing the people you have already, getting them the training and support they need, or potentially getting them the support of an outsourced accountant as well. What is the right program? So I have mentioned SNSP a lot through this training. I've obviously talked about the choice program. So you can actually participate in one or both. With that being said, the major differences are there's no fiscal and internal control practice if you are just doing the SNSP program. So if you are only doing that program, you are not doing the PSCP or /choice, whichever one you want to call it. If you are not doing that program, you get to get rid of an entirely different, one of the 4 audits, which is nice. Since the fiscal and internal practice audit does take a good amount of effort. However, there's always a caveat. Applications require more work and there are additional items needed. So it is not like the choice applications. There is definitely a lot, since they are individuals with special needs. You have to have an IEP for them and reach out to the school and have services agreements. There is a lot going on that it might, if you're having both choice and SNSP programs, you might want to look at hiring another person to just do SNSP. I have potentially think one client that does both, and that only has one person to do both. And that's the one I mentioned. That's only a school. They don't have a church, and it's small. It is not a full kindergarten through 12th grade school. Okay, it is just a grade school. So they don't have as much going on. So it makes sense that they're, back to the first question, the sufficient staffing, that there is only one person doing both. However, if you get to full-size schools, you have grade school, middle school, and high school, or you have a lot of people who are participating in just grade school and a choice program, and you want to add SNSP, you might be beneficial to hire someone to help through that process and to become very knowledgeable in it. Because the difference between the SNSP 2 is there are certain way more, I should say, than the choice, where there are uncorrectable errors, such as missing a signature or a date, that could render the application ineligible and you don't get the payment. So you really want someone for the SNSP program that can really dedicate time to looking at those applications and making sure that that all makes sense. So is there a need for a specific technology? Obviously you want accounting software. So a lot of the time my clients use QuickBooks. A lot of clients are moving to QuickBooks Online, which I like because we can have access to just log in to pull the information we need. Some individuals are still using desktop. So come audit time, we either get a copy, an accountant copy of the QuickBooks, or one of my super high-tech clients, I say high-tech when I wouldn't count it as high-tech given we have AI now, but they bring in an actual desktop computer. We get access to be able to look in their QuickBooks, and they attach all of their transactions in QuickBooks. So we don't even have to send them a list. All we have to do is have that desktop computer next to us and find everything we need, which is not the standard by no means. And then we have student information software. The most common one I see is fax. And then the donor database. So a lot of this, if you're receiving a lot of contributions, maybe you're just a school and you're not receiving as much, this might not be as applicable, but if you do have that church side, you definitely want to get a donor database if you don't have one already. And a lot of the times I see Blackbaud, Bloomerang, there's a lot of options out there. So what's next? So taking these slides and trying to make changes and improvements is number one. If you don't have a lot of policies and procedures in place, start there. Making sure your staff and your team who are going to be managing this are comfortable with the steps and proceeding as much. Again, we're not striving for perfection. It will never be perfect in the first year. We are striving for less stress when we're actually doing audit field work. So making sure you can get as much done as possible. Then you want to designate someone to be the choice administrator and designees. These are the individuals that are going to be working on the choice applications and the person solely responsible for providing those sign-offs and final approvals on specific items. And then you want to complete the interested at school form on DPI's website, the required trainings, and quizzes on DPI's website. And I'm going to actually bring up DPI's website to show you all of the resources. Like, there is only so much I can fit in a slide, in my slides through this hour, that they cover way more in depth. And then next, you want to obtain an auditor and schedule fieldwork. So before I have any questions, I'm just going to bring up the slide, the website. So you should be able to see the Department of Public Instruction on my screen. And then all you have to do, depending on which one you want, I would just type in choice, private choice school comes up. And then you can go to information for schools, which has everything you need to know. The OAS system, the application process, where you'll see those wonderful checklists. There is so much information on here that DPI provides. Trainings that are required, everything you could possibly want to know. So just getting familiar with this website. And then I was going to mention it on the next slide, but there is also going to be more trainings like this to specifically go into what we expect on the audit side for each of those audits, a little bit more in depth. So if you're like, wow, those 13 audit areas for the fiscal practice, that's a lot. There's going to be future trainings on that to get a little bit deeper dive. But also what's great, DPI puts our audit procedures on here. You can actually look under September enrollment audit, for example, and pull up the September audit guide. So maybe you want to get a jump start and be like, okay, what are these auditors actually going to be looking for? It is all here. It is all available to you all to consume. So nothing should be a surprise. Before we jump into questions, I just wanted to switch this. Just resources. So trainings like this, like I mentioned, we're going to have more trainings. I'm going to do a couple more with those types of audits. We also offer consulting services to get you started. Depending on the level of consulting services, that could potentially mean that we could not be your auditor. So I just want to keep that in mind. And then DPI's website, as I just previously showed, there are a lot of resources out there outside of just this training and what we offered. You saw them up there. They have the audit guides. So please make sure you're looking there to find additional information. We also have things like QuickBook user group sessions, where we allow you to join a session, ask questions. If you are struggling with QuickBooks, a great time for those who might not be as comfortable with QuickBooks to go in. And we also offer consulting services with that as well. So making sure you take a look at any upcoming events on our website that are more to your liking, like this one. Otherwise, I would love if anyone had any questions.
I don't have any questions in the Q&A right now for you, Lisa. So I'll just take a minute here while we see if any questions do come in for your registrants. But just going off of what you said, we've got a couple of great nonprofit trainings coming up. Keep an eye on the upcoming events section on our website, wagnercpas.com. We have a webinar detailing the Form 990T on August 15th. A certified nonprofit accounting professional course beginning on September 12th. And again, that information is all on our website, wagnercpas.com. If you're not currently receiving our emails, please just reach out to me or Lisa and we'll get you signed up to receive our emails so you can see what's coming up. And Lisa, I see, has her contact information up on the screen. So if stuff comes up after this webinar, this slide deck will be included in the follow-up email I'm sending to you. So you'll have all of Lisa's contact information available to you then. Okay, and I do see just one question, Lisa, if you have time to answer that.
Yeah, of course. I was gonna say, because everyone's been way too easy if you don't have any questions for me. Question, our organization works regularly to help onboard new schools to the choice program, and they often ask about auditors. Is your firm still taking new clients? So this is a great question, and it depends. I am the only person in the Madison office that is specialized in this. So we just onboarded one for the 2023-2024 school year. So potentially, if your clients are looking out to the 2024-2025, we could definitely give that a look to see if they're a good fit. And we do have our Milwaukee location is also has a team that does this. So if you do have any clients that you want to send them our way, we would gladly have a conversation with them to see if they have a good fit and if it works with our schedule. But for 2023 to 2024, this upcoming year, we are not taking any new clients. Awesome. Well, if that's it, I truly appreciate everyone's time. This was my first client webinar. So I really hope you enjoyed it, or enjoyed it as much as you possibly could, but really appreciate your time. And again, my contact information, if you have any questions, shoot me an email. I'd gladly love to help you. Otherwise, have a wonderful day.